Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and there are still people that are joining the retro game collecting community every day. Every day, there's someone who decides to say that they're going to start building a collection of retro games, and they try to figure out a place to start. In my opinion, I think the sixth generation is definitely a sweet spot. It's a little bit older than seventh gen, which, in my opinion, seventh gen just recently joined the retro. It recently fell under the retro umbrella, and seventh gen is going to be pretty much uh, your Xbox 360, your PlayStation 3, and your Wii U. That I think is the last generation to officially fall under the retro umbrella at this point. I still don't consider PlayStation 4 or the original Nintendo Switch or Xbox One. I do not consider those consoles particularly retro yet, but I think it's safe to say that 360, PS3, and Wii U definitely can fall under the retro umbrella. But still, I still feel like those consoles, they're the easiest to collect for in terms of if you're wanting to start a retro collection, but that's because they're the most readily available. They're the most out there. You're gonna find a lot of games for those consoles because they have not become so retro that they're highly sought after. There's only certain games out of those libraries that command a price tag of, I'd say, $50 or higher, right? So you can still easily build a strong collection there. I think anything after Gen 6, so Gen 5 would be the original PlayStation, the N64, the Sega Saturn. That generation, I think, is where prices like jump exponentially. That's where things get really expensive. Now, in the case of the PlayStation 1, that library is so vast that you can find a lot of games that are not expensive, but like the good stuff or the popular stuff is definitely going to run you more money on average than, say, a seventh gen or even some sixth generation games. When you start to look at things like the N64, then it gets really pricey, especially for those popular titles. Mario 64, the Mario Party games, you know, you start to think about like games like Conker's Bad Fur Day. And then the other challenge with the N64 is that it's not a very large library. It's not really that vast. There's not a lot of really amazing third-party games. It's very Nintendo centric. So if you're not a super fan of like all things Mario, all things Donkey Kong and Kirby and Zelda, if you're wanting to branch outside of those like main Nintendo characters, the N64 isn't really going to be the spot for you. And then when you look at something like the Sega Saturn, because it had such a limited lifespan, and it is it is the rarest of that generation, you're going to really start to have to ante up for the good Sega Saturn games and things like that. And so I think that's where you start to run into some real challenges when you get to Gen 5. And then Gen 4, forget it, because now you're talking the Super Nintendo era, the Sega Genesis era, the TurboGrafx era, the Jaguar era. That's where things really get hairy, and prices really start to jump. And beyond like pricing, just the difficulty in finding the games, I think, becomes a real big challenge, which is why for me, I think Gen 6 is the sweet spot. And when you look at Gen 6, you're looking at the PlayStation 2, you're looking at the original Xbox, and you're looking at the GameCube. And I guess for some people might throw the Dreamcast in there in terms of like what qualifies as sixth gen games. Now, I can say right off the bat, the Dreamcast, because it did not sell as well as the PlayStation 2 or Xbox or even the GameCube, it's going to be much more challenging finding quality games for the Dreamcast. Most places don't even have them. And even if you want to look at a place like GameStop, the odds of you finding a PlayStation 2 game, an original Xbox game, or even a GameCube game at GameStop is exponentially higher than you running into a Dreamcast game. You're rarely going to run into Dreamcast game, and if you do, it's probably going to be one of the most popular titles like a Sonic Adventure, and that's probably about it. Maybe you'll run into like a House of the Dead type of game. They typically tend to have like a lot of the Marvel versus Capcom games from time to time, but you're not really going to find some of the more like rare stuff. Not rare stuff, because some of these games aren't even rare. Like Shenmue isn't super rare or expensive, neither is Grandia 2, but you're going to have a hard time finding that on a consistent basis or as consistently like, say, a Sonic Adventure. So in my opinion, for someone just diving in and jumping in, I say sixth generation is the sweet spot because of two reasons. One, you're going to be able to find these games a lot more easily. I think there's still a ton of sixth gen stuff floating around out there in the ether. You can still find a ton of Gen 6 stuff at yard sales, mom and pop shops. I mean, and when I say a ton, I mean a ton relative to other consoles, right? Like I'm saying a ton relative to like Super Nintendo games. You're gonna find a lot more GameCube games than you will Super Nintendo games if you just go out randomly hunting out in the wild, right? You're gonna find a lot more PlayStation 2 games than you will find Sega Genesis games or Sega Saturn games if you go out hunting in the wild. So I think there's definitely more accessibility when it comes to Gen 6 games. Now, when it comes to affordability, that's where things start to get a little bit tricky. Now, when I just, if you were to use my Gen 6 collection as a microcosm, a couple things about Gen 6. For one, there was a ton of overlap. And I would say there was even more. I feel like a lot of that overlap occurred between the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox, more so than the GameCube. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of games that came out across all three platforms, but I feel like there's more overlap when it comes to the original Xbox and the PlayStation 2, more so than GameCube. A few examples. One, the Castlevania series, right? Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness. Those came out on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. They didn't come out on the GameCube. Or when you think about a game like Beatdown, right? Beatdown came out on the original Xbox and PlayStation 2. I'm pretty sure Beatdown did not come out on the GameCube. What's another example? Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came out on the PlayStation 2, came out on the original Xbox. There is no Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the GameCube. So I think there's a lot more overlap there. Now, I feel like Nintendo did what it's always typically done, and it's rested on its original IPs, the Mario games, right? The Zelda games, the Pokemon games. This is where Nintendo makes its money. This is its bread and butter. And this is where I think Nintendo really, this is how they survive. They've got just very strong IPs. They've got very strong game franchises that put them in a position where they don't have to branch out and work with so many different third-party game developers and things like that, which I guess is cool for them. But as a person who enjoys variety, as a person who enjoys just trying out different games and having different experiences, I think what we saw from PlayStation and Xbox, for me, having a more of that eclectic library definitely is more appealing to someone like me. Now, from the standpoint of variety, I think PlayStation 2 wins that battle when it comes to Gen 6. A lot more variety, a lot more games that you can play, and accessibility. I think PlayStation 2 games are even more accessible than original Xbox games. But when it comes to pricing, Xbox actually does beat PlayStation 2. It really does beat PlayStation 2. Meaning if there's a game that came out on PS2 and Xbox, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be more expensive on the PlayStation 2 than it will be on the Xbox. All that being said, I still think PlayStation 2 is the sweet spot when it comes to collecting for people that are new to collecting retro games. I still think the PS2 is the sweet spot for retro collecting because you can find a lot of good stuff. You don't have to break the bank. If you do want to spend a little bit of extra money and probably go for some more of those rare and higher end titles, you can. So you have that option there. But then you also have the option of sticking with some of the more lower end titles, 10, 15 bucks. And you could have a really strong library of games with each game not costing you more than $30. And so I think that's the appeal for the PlayStation 2. And it's not that these games are necessarily way worse than the more expensive games. Actually, in some cases, these games are more fun. But you just get that variety, you get that optionality, and most importantly, you get the accessibility when going for a PlayStation 2 collection. So it's the biggest part of the reason why I regretted selling my original PlayStation 2 collection. I still regret selling the amount of games that I sold out of that collection to this day. And it's a big part of the reason why I will probably struggle selling any of my PlayStation 2 games today, because the PlayStation 2 was just awesome. But let me know what you guys think. What do you think is the retro collecting sweet spot at this point in 2025? First quarter is almost done. We're going into the second quarter. Second quarter, in my opinion, is like peak retro game hunting season. It's spring. Everybody's doing their spring cleaning. I don't think the third quarter, meaning from July, August, and September, I do not think that that's really the peak of retro collecting season, because that's usually peak vacation season. Everyone's going on vacation. Everyone's trying to enjoy the summer, family time. Especially between like July, you got 4th of July, things like that. And then once September rolls around, everyone's kind of getting ready to go back to school. So it's really not that, I don't feel like that's peak. I think peak game hunting season is pretty much now, from April all the way till June, when everyone's doing their cleaning, everyone's wrapping up the school year, and everyone's getting ready to enjoy the summer. So let me know what you think in 2025 is the retro collecting sweet spot. I'm interested to know your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.